go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. If we again can remind ourselves just very briefly that of our motivation for studying, discussing the Lam Rim. As Lama Tsongkhapa explained in the text itself, right? Like right now we're studying the, you call it like the practices in common with a person of lesser capacity or lower scope, right? But that word in common with means that one's own motivation would be bodhicitta, would be the great scope motivation. So that sense of universal compassion, a compassion that embraces all sentient beings, as vast as the vastness of space. And that sense of universal responsibility, or the unique attitude of altruism, which views all beings like one's own precious children, has a feeling of responsibility for taking care of their welfare. Which is grounded in love. A kind of warm, kind, affectionate attitude towards all beings. And then that attitude of bodhicitta. So recognizing right now I can't liberate and benefit all beings, so I must achieve enlightenment in order to be most effective, most skillful, most able to help others. So then we're studying the path to enlightenment or Buddhahood, because we want to achieve enlightenment and Buddhahood in order to be of benefit to all sentient beings who are so precious. And so we keep that motivation in mind as we study. Now we're up to this section, right? So we've been recently we've been studying the section on the 9 points, right? Or sort of sometimes they call it the 3 root points, or 3 roots, 3 main points, and the 9 reasons, and 3 conclusions. Sometimes the way it's described. And so we went through the first main point, which is the certainty of death. And we already last week we went through the second point, which is the uncertainty of the time of death, with its 3 reasons. And so today we're up to the third main point, which is at the time of death, nothing except for the Dharma will be of benefit. And so for those who have the text, it's on page 57. But that's the title of this main point in this set of contemplations, of contemplative meditation. And so this one has, again, 3, right, this main point of there's nothing except the Dharma is a benefit at the time of death. Then again it has 3 contemplations, let's say, 3 points to contemplate. And so, in the order Lama Tsongkhapa presents them here, the first of those 3 contemplations is that at the time of death, friends and relatives are not of benefit. The way Lama Tsongkhapa phrased it here, he says, you cannot take even one of them along with you. And so what's Lama Tsongkhapa mean there, right? Let's sort of, how do you contemplate that, and what's the meaning in terms of practice? Right? Is that so when we're when we're focused on, you could say, like the affairs of this life, or another way of saying is when we're focused on our own self-centeredness. Right? Actually, I mean, we put so much, what he's getting at here, right, is that we put huge amounts of energy into, so to say it, like what others think of us, what we get from others, right? Like what we feel we need from others, like that kind of relationship. The kind of relationship where we're grasping at others. So we feel this is not the kind of relationship earlier we were talking about, like universal love and compassion. That's not what he's getting at here, right? Here what he's getting at is this kind of relationship where we're grasping at others, saying, this is my partner, this is my friend, this is my family. Those others are not so important, but so it's that kind of relationship, right? This relationship of grasping, or of attachment, which is a fair word for that. And what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is that at the time of death, right? Actually, we have so much attachment like that. It's really true, right? If you check, like that's a very deep, visceral feeling for us. And what he's saying, of course, is at the time of death, we have this feeling, I have to be with this person, but by no choice, there's no choice, we're going to separate. And at that time, actually, not only will that relationship can't help us, but actually that attachment harms us. Right? Whereas if you think about it, right, like, actually it's true, even if, even in this life, you could just see by analogy, it's much more, what's the word, extreme when we die, right? But even in this life, like, it's quite true, right? Like, in other words, when, there's somebody you want to be with, right? And then they have to part, right? It's quite upsetting. And think about it this way, actually, sometimes if you contemplate this point, when you try to really contemplate it in meditation, you actually start to feel like you think about that, right? You think, wow, it's so hard at the airport when somebody I love is leaving, or even if just one person who I love dies, right? It's so upset, there's so much grief, right? At the time of death, you lose everybody at once. Everybody you feel close to and care about is lost at the same time. And so what this is getting at is, like, with this feeling, when he says you can't take them with you, the feeling is like, you want to have them, right? They're my person in some way. But without choice, you separate at that time. And so that kind of relationship doesn't benefit you at the time of death and actually causes you more fear, grief, like right as you're dying. Right? Well, what's the experience like then? It's actually this sort of grasping and what's the word? Upset. I guess. And so this is saying, if you contemplate, if you do the other, you remember you're doing this after having contemplated the certainty of death and the uncertainty of time of death. So here what you're contemplating is, wow, so you actually meditate, wow, I put so much energy into my attachments and my grasping relationships with others, and yet at the time, remember, like you already know, I may die tomorrow. Right? I may die today. Actually, we've already contemplated that. Actually, you think I am going to die today. It's one of the meditations, right? So if you think I'm going to die today, then what's the point of grasping so strongly? What's the point of this kind of viewing this person as mine? Actually, there is nobody who's mine. We're each a sentient being, right? We've met for a while. Right, there's that famous, in many ways it's said, but one is all compounded phenomena are impermanent. Another way of saying it is, whatever comes together falls apart. Right? If things come together, it's very nature that they're going to part. Right? All meetings end in parting, that kind of thing. So here we actually contemplate that, right? So you contemplate, wow, these people who I grasp at so strongly, first of all, someday, but I don't know what day. So it could be today, could be quite tomorrow, could be next week. Right? My own children, my own spouse, my own parents, we will part. So the idea is that you, through this contemplation, you realize, wow, it seems in this life, actually it's funny, right? You think about it from a karmic point of view. I mean, if you think about it, like we feel, right? Like when you're really in that attachment relationship, you actually feel you would kill somebody else for that person sometimes, right? Or you would harm somebody else to defend that person. If somebody else like insulted that person, you would fight with them or argue with them or something. But actually, then, like that whole we gave that analogy last time. At once, then in a few moments you die. You may die, right? And then it's like that whole relationship was like a dream. Then you may, then the next life you may have some relationship with the other person and get angry at this person for insulting them, because it changes, right? Every relationship change is the point. So anyway, the real point here though is to recognize, wow, those kinds of relationships I have, which seem like the most important thing, when seen from the perspective of the truth of impermanence and death, right, the fact that we're going to die, have no essence. That's the idea. Which is different. I just want to clarify because Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't get into this detail, right? I actually already said this in a way, but right, this is not saying that acts of genuine loving kindness don't have meaning. Those have meaning. Right? What it's saying is that, but that's just an action. Right? That's that's an action that you. We know that actually, right? Whereas when you just do, it could be for a stranger though, right? Whereas when you do an act of loving kindness, whether it's for somebody you know for a while or somebody you don't know well, an act of loving kindness, an act of generosity, that's a different thing. What he's getting at here is, he says here, friends and relatives, right? What he's talking about there, when he says friends and relatives, are people we grasp at as mine. Right? He's saying that kind of relationship is completely useless at the time of death. Has no value at all and actually causes you suffering. And if you contemplate this, what you start to realize is, wow, the reason I don't practice Dharma a lot of the time is that, actually. Whereas I don't practice Dharma because I'm so caught up in my grasping at those kinds of relationships. And he's saying then at the time of death, you don't bring any benefit to the other person, you can't help them, and they can't help you in that kind of relationship. And so if you contemplate this, what happens, right? Your mind starts to turn away from that kind of grasping attachment. That's the idea. Then I'll go to the second one. The second point he makes is he says, the title of this next point is, your possessions can't come along. You can't take your possessions along with you when you die. Actually, people sort of wish they could sometimes. And he says, what he actually says here is, whatever heaps of attractive riches you have obtained, you can't take even a small particle of them. And so again, here, what you contemplate, right, when you're contemplating this point, is like how much energy, actually, in your life you put into collecting, right? And it may be money, it may be, it depends on what, right? Some people want a lot of pairs of shoes, or something. Some people want a lot of, clothes, right? Some people want a lot of books. Some people want a lot of, right? But we all some people want little rocks, right? Whatever. Other people it's diamonds. I don't know. It depends what kind of rock. Both rocks. Right, but different people. We all so this is not about people. Right? The first point actually was sort of we collect people actually. Right? Oh my, right? Somebody feels I'm a valuable person because I have. Actually, it really is like that in our society, right? A person says, I'm valuable because I have my husband or wife and my children and my family around me. Then I feel I'm valuable. Then somebody who doesn't have that, they're not valuable, right? Then this one is we collect stuff, right? And actually, then people feel, I'm okay because I have this much money in the bank, or because I have this kind of house or something, this car. And what he's saying here, right? Of course, first of all, it's totally obvious, right? That you can't take it with you when you go, isn't that the same? You can't take it with you. But actually, the point here, in other words, we all know that you can't take your car with you when you die, or your house. But if you contemplate, right, if you have to connect this to the previous point, which was, I don't know when I'm going to die. I may die today, right? I may die tomorrow, right? And then you check, what's my relationship to my stuff, to my bank account, or to my home, or to my. And if you check, right, there's usually some feeling of I need that. I'm grasping at that. That's mine. That's really important to me, right? And so you're trying to. You see what I'm doing? You see what I'm getting at? This isn't just intellect. If you just say, if all you did was think, well, I can't take it with me when I go. You would think it once and you would move on. What this is trying to do is you get at your own internal feeling of like mindness about your stuff, and you check, how much energy do I put into that stuff every day? Right? But where's my mind at? You know, about my, and whatever it is for you, whether it's your car, your bank account, your clothes, your whatever, like food, right? All different things that we grasp at. And then you have to check, and you sort of analyze, right? Oh wow, I really have this concept of permanence, as though that's mine, and as though there's some value, and as though therefore I should work hard to have that. And what this is saying is, first of all, when you die, that's of zero value. Also, when you die, also that's a distraction from your actually practicing Dharma, which benefits you at the time of death. Right? Anytime your mind is caught up in my clothes or my house or my this, is a moment you're not doing anything of any meaning. That's what it's saying. Right? You're wasting that moment, that time of this precious human rebirth. That's really what it's getting at there. Right? And so it's trying to help us to view things realistically. See, and this is where we're getting at really this idea of that we have this delusion of permanence. You know, and you may say, I'm not deluded, I know I'm permanent. But if you check it, the idea here is you check how you're actually living, right? What's your mind focusing on? What does your mind focus on before you go to bed? What's it focused on when you wake up? What's it focused on when you're going about your day? Right? And if what you're focused on is like, you know, my relationships, my things, then it's not focused on Dharma, right? And it's also not, you're not really integrating, this means, the awareness of impermanence, right? And this is trying to help us integrate that awareness into our actual experience. And then I'll cover the third point here, and then I'll pause for questions. The third point is, the outline, with the way Friesen Rinpoche says it, is you can't take your body along, either. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, if you have to give up even the flesh and bones you are born with, what need is there to talk about anything else? Right? And so again, right, what they oftentimes in the commentary on this point, they'll point out like, it's actually interesting, right? At times it may seem like our relationships are the most important thing, at times it may seem like our possessions are the most important thing, but when it comes down to it, our grasping at our own body is the most fundamental attachment, right? And again, we have this view, actually check for yourself, right? We do that, right? There's this view of like my body is first of all, it's mine, right? And like we have some idea that it actually exists as something with some stability, right? But actually your body, first of all, like, what is it? Right? It's just a bunch of stuff. Like they sometimes call it a compounded phenomena, right? Buddhism has a philosophical term, compounded. It means stuff that came together in a certain shape, or something like that, right? Actually, there's nothing, I mean, if you know, this is just scientifically true, and Buddhism said this long ago, right? There's nothing that even lasts for a second as a stable thing that's part of a body. I mean, on an atomic level, also even on a cellular level. Whether you look at your body like subatomically or atomically or in terms of cells or in terms of organs, on each of those levels there's nothing permanent there. And yet we feel somehow this is like real and it's solid and it's me. And again, what's Lama Tsongkhapa saying? What he's saying is that like, first of all, you don't take your body with you. And also like Lama Zogram Shalpan at this point, he says like, he sometimes jokes, right, about like, he says like people put so much energy into their bodies, right? So like he jokes about people like, you know, like whether it's makeup or going to the gym or what's those things like plastic surgeries or things like that. But he's saying, you know, what he's pointing out is like at any moment this won't be your body anymore, right? I went through that last time where then like, you know, like so you can spend so much money, right, to get like the right cream or plastic surgery or go to the gym, and then like the next day, if you die that day, then the next day your body will be frightening, actually, to anybody. Right? Like people are freaked out by it, and they want to call somebody else to come take it away, because it's so scary, actually. And that's just because you stop breathing. That's the only difference, right? The body's the same stuff there. So anyway, what this is saying is that decrease your attachment to your own body. Right? Not to focus on it quite as much. That doesn't mean don't take care of yourself, but it's saying that attitude of attachment. Right? It distracts us from practicing Dharma. That's what it's saying. There's one other point about that. Like, I guess, the other point I was going to get at too is like, again, if you, sometimes you might have like, what's it say, when you contemplate this point, it can come up like, sometimes it could be, you can really feel, like, recognize your attachment. Other times, there's almost like a defense mechanism, I think. You feel like, I'm not that attached or something. But then if you just think, like, actually, on this one, if you have to think you're going to lose your whole body. Sometimes for me, sometimes I get that, I get this defense mechanism. I'm like, I wouldn't care, something like that. But then if I just think, if somebody just chopped off one finger, I would completely freak out. Like, and then I'm like, that's just one finger. I lose my whole body. Then it's easier to like feel it. Like sometimes I get that when I meditate on this point. I'm like, I'm not attached. It's no big deal. And then I just think, even my pinky, right, the smallest finger, somebody chopped it, I'd be like, like totally freaked out, and terrified. Then I'm like, well, at the time of death, you lose your whole hand, but also your arm, the other arm, your legs, your head. So sometimes with each of these, there can be defense mechanisms. Again, like I just want to say that too. The same thing about the people, right? There are times where if you're sort of defended, you'll say, I'm not that attached, and right. But then just think like, if you think that, right, you think, if I lost everybody, I'm okay, something like that, right? But then if you think, well, actually, just look at the suffering of one, like, actually it's horrific, right? Like, in other words, when you think of actually the grief of losing one person, right? Or if you think of like, if you're married or something, right? And you think if your partner cheated on you, then you would completely not be able to sleep at night, right? You'd be so upset. Here you're losing everybody. Right? Whatever it takes to sort of like recognize it's totally ridiculous. It's like you have to realize what you're trying to get at here is your actual experience of grasping. Sometimes like we don't want to face that. So I'm just giving ideas how you can, and again, like you can think, I'm not attached to my stuff, right? But then if you imagine like what's it called? Imagine that, actually, just think if the bank made a mistake and suddenly like $300 were missing from your account, right? And then you went in and you said, hey, $300, and they said, no, that's your mistake. And they wouldn't give you $300 back, right? You might get quite angry. Right? But this is like all your stuff is gone. So again, I'm just pointing out like, if that comes up in your mind, the sort of resistance of saying, oh no, I don't really care if I lose everything, right? Then just think, actually, if they make a mistake at the counter, right? Like if you go to the counter and they make a mistake and like you say, I was supposed to get a 1 back, I was supposed to get a 10 back, and they say, no, they gave you a 1, right? Your mind might get quite upset. What do you mean? No, I gave you 20, not 10, right? This is saying, like, again, if you would get upset at that, then when you die, everything's gone. So I'm just pointing out psychologically how you can work with it if when you meditate on this point, you sort of intellectualize or something. Now on the other hand, if you don't have any grasp, there's like, if you really have that experience that when somebody chops your finger off, you think, okay, well, it wasn't my body anyway. And if somebody steals your money, you think, well, it wasn't my money anyway. Then you already realize this. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're not at that point, then it comes good. Anyway, so those are the 3 points. Well, and then I'll say so the decision, right? So each of these, right, there's a beginning heading, right, which is, in this case, the heading was called, at the time of death, nothing but the Dharma is a benefit. Then there are these 3 contemplations, like 3 examples. And then from those 3 examples, there's a conclusion. And that, I'll start with the very beginning of that, and then I'll pause. So it says the conclusion is to think, I'm going to die. At that time, everything about this life will be left behind, and I go forward. My mental continuum, right? This consciousness or this mental continuum, he says, will go to another world, right? Or will go to another rebirth. And you actually think, and that may happen or will happen. You actually contemplate, I'm going to live as though that's going to happen today. And you think over and over again, that's going to happen today. Then you think, so that all that's worth doing, you actually the conclusion is, then I want to focus my energy on spiritual practice. Right? That's the conclusion. I'll go into a little more detail. I just want to pause. Any questions about it? There's a little more to discuss about this, but I want to pause there. Any questions so far? It's a serious topic in a way, really. It's pretty clear. so here, what one is doing, right? This is like, they sometimes say this is the entryway to Dharma, this particular point. Right? Like, and so this entryway to Dharma here is sort of, let's say it, is living as though this were your last day. Right? Living without so much grasping, another way of saying it. Right? And what he gets at here, Lama Tsongkhapa in this next part, he says, the need to try hard, since that's the foundation of the path. Right? I want to say a few things about that, actually, the points that Lama Tsongkhapa makes here. One point that's implicit, actually, well, he says it really, he uses that term I used earlier, compounded phenomena. Right? So a compounded phenomena, and what that really means is, right, is anything that comes together, by its very nature, will fall apart. It doesn't need some external factors, but the nature of like when there are things made up of parts, right, or things that come together, it's in the nature of those things to then fall apart. That was one of the very fundamental insights that the Buddha had, historically, right? The historical Buddha, when he meditated under the Bodhi tree, that was one of his numerous insights. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. And so, on the one hand, right, we could say, there's a lot of these contemplations on that have been reflecting, right? So like, my body is made up of compounded phenomena that came together, so it's going to fall apart. Also, the connection between this body and this mind is a compounded phenomenon, right? This conscious awareness and this body came together, they'll eventually separate. Also, my relationships with other people, right? There were causes and conditions that caused us to become friends, or for somebody to become my relative, right? But those are temporary. Those relationships by nature are temporary, right? So those will also fall apart. This applies also to nations, right? No nation is permanent. Right? Planets, no planet is permanent, right? Anything that's come together, this whole solar system, right, is by nature impermanent, right? So there's one contemplation like that where you contemplate, you think the whole Earth, right, was going to eventually burn up in the solar, when the sun expands, right? So you think, so then definitely this body won't make it. It's just a small part, right? It's a bunch of particles from this Earth that just happen to be in this form for temporary causes and conditions. But one thing that Lama Tsongkhapa points out here is he points out there's something positive. There's, in one way, for those of us like myself who grasp at permanence, then this sort of, when we start to contemplate impermanence, it's sort of disturbing, right? Or it's upsetting in a way. Because it's like, well, it'd be nice if I could, if I develop a friendship, it'd be nice if I could just have that forever. And so then I feel sort of like, oh, I don't like that. I'd like it to last forever. It's not going to happen. It's by its very nature, it's not going to happen. So there can be an upsetting part. But here, Lama Tsongkhapa also quotes somebody named Dolpa, who points out the positive aspect of impermanence. And what he points out there is this, if all things are impermanent, that means you can become enlightened also, right? He's saying, you're not enlightened now, right? But that state is also impermanent, right? And so he says something here very important. He's saying, which is actually the core of the Buddha's insights. I just wanted to sort of emphasize it a little, right? In other words, the Buddha taught impermanence quite a lot, right? And really, if you look at, like, let's just say it, the Buddha, I said this before, the Buddha, you would have his students sometimes go sit in the charnel grounds, right? Like a cemetery, right? They would watch bodies being chopped up or being eaten by animals or whatever, right? That was to decrease their grasping at permanence. But there was always a positive side to this teaching on impermanence, which was your suffering is also impermanent. Your problems are impermanent. Your mental afflictions and delusions are impermanent. Even your grasping at permanence is impermanent. Right? Your grasping at a self is impermanent. And that means, and now he says here, when the right causes and conditions come about, that will change. Those things will change. Right? And if the right causes and conditions come about, you'll become a bodhisattva. If the right causes and conditions come about, you'll become a Buddha. And sometimes they make this point, whether you want to or not, it'll happen. Right? In other words, if you really want to be enlightened, but you're you still have the causes for suffering, you're going to keep suffering. On the other hand, if you have the causes for enlightenment, even if you say, I don't care if I become enlightened, I just want to be available to others, without any choice you'll become enlightened, and therefore you'll be more available to others. And so what he says here is, he says, if you accumulate, the actual lines, his real points, he says, if you accumulate collections, meaning virtuous deeds, right, and wisdom, and if you purify your negative karma and your obscurations, and then he says, and if you make requests to your guru and deities, and then you keep contemplating insistently and with perseverance, right, contemplating these points, the Lam Rim, then he says, then in just a few years, realizations will come about effortlessly, right? For compounded phenomena do not remain static as they are. Right? So what he's saying is, because you're impermanent, right, if you do those few things, you'll achieve realizations of the path to enlightenment, and eventually you'll become a Buddha. And he's saying, and that will happen, it's funny, he says, if you make effort, then that will happen effortlessly. Right? So if you make effort now, then later, effortlessly, all these things will happen, right? Because you've created the right causes and conditions. Does that make sense? So it's all a matter of, because things are impermanent, they depend upon causes and conditions. And so, anyway, so that's his point there. And then, now I'm going to move back to his previous point, right, where he says, I want to make one, this one also is worth commenting on a bit. He says actually the decision is, there is nothing to do other than practice Dharma, and non-attachment to this life arises, right? So through all these contemplations, what he's saying is, so what does this mean, non-attachment to this life, right? What he's getting at is, it's not like, is if you understand impermanence, right, it doesn't, and like the Lamas point this out, it doesn't mean, there's not an external prescription. It doesn't mean that you go sit in a cave, or that you go sit in a hut, or, it could mean that, or it could not mean that. It could mean it could mean anything externally. Because non-attachment to this life is a state of mind. Right? And I wanted to make a point that helped me personally some. Sometimes Lama Zobrumshe, one time when he was teaching on this, he called that, he had a phrase for that, he called it the thought of no need. Right? In other words, I found that helpful. What he was saying was like, if you really recognize I may die tomorrow, then there's a feeling that arises like, I don't need anything. Like, all I need to do is like, make the most of this moment practicing Dharma. Everything else doesn't matter. It's sort of like I can relax. And like, he actually said something like, I can't remember the exact phrase, but he basically said something like, the person who has that thought, even if they're just like sort of laying around, they have so much peace in their mind. Right? Then he said, like, as long as we're sort of grasping it, like, it's actually true, like it's an incredibly tense state, right? If we feel like I have to have enough stuff, and I have to keep my job, and I have to make my mortgage payment, and I have to save for retirement, and I have to like keep all these people, like my boss has to stay okay with me, my partner has to stay okay with me, my kids I have to worry about, like, as long as you're in that state, right? Like, there's so much tension, actually. Right? It's like, and it's all because of like this sort of, we're like trying to hold up. It's actually very tense and stressful. And the reason it's so tense and stressful is like, we're putting so much energy into holding together something that we don't have control over, actually. Right? Like, and we know that on some level, right? So you feel, I've got to, like actually think about it, right? If you feel like you have to control things, right? Like, I have to keep my kids okay. Right? But we all know, right, that we don't have that power. If you have children, right? Like, whereas there are people who are wonderful parents and their kids, whatever, end up in a cancer ward, right? They can't help it. It's the worst nightmare, right, to somebody who has, and like, but that's our existential situation. Whereas it's like, we don't have control, right? And we say, I've got to save up for retirement, but we don't know if the economy's going to crash, right? Nobody knows that, right? And you say, I've got to stay healthy, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to eat healthy, right, or something. But actually we know, like, people do that and then they die, right? And we say, like, I'm going to keep my relationship good. There are all these books about that, right? How do you keep your relationship good? Like, and they say, oh, like, do this or do that, right? But then people who do all those things, then sometimes their partner leaves them anyway, right? Like, so it's like a very stressful, tense situation to try to sustain all the stuff of this life. because it's a losing battle. You know, I always think it's funny. One thing that Bob Thurman says sometimes, I like his phrase. Well, he sometimes says, it's like when you have this sense of permanence and ego, you're fighting against the universe, and of course the universe is going to win. You know, that's what he said. Another way of saying it is you're fighting against impermanence. And if you're fighting against impermanence, you're always going to lose because, that's what we say it. Well, first of all, impermanence has already infiltrated your camp, right? Like if you're fighting against impermanence, like impermanence is the nature of your mind and your body, so you've already lost. You know what I mean? Like if you say, I'm going to fight against impermanence, I'm going to hold this together. You've already lost, right? Because there's nobody on your side, in the sense that there's nobody on the side of permanence. There is no permanence, right? And so, this is what I pointed out, like, actually the view of permanence is incredibly stressful, right? Like, we live our lives always stressed. And it's true, even if you finally, like, if you were to somehow pull together, like, everything you could want, right? So, like, you've got, like, some kind of, whatever you've got, billions of dollars and a beautiful house and a beautiful partner, and, right, like, you still know somewhere deep down you could lose it all in a second. Right? Like, and it's true, right? Like, you know, think of like, you know, so you buy a beautiful place and then there's a, right, maybe you want to go have a place on the beach, then there's a tsunami, you know. Like, in other words, there's just no control, and you have no control over it, right? Like, and we want to think, like, sometimes, especially like, I think all cultures like this, but especially America, we sometimes think, well, I'll build a levee, you know, or something. If that doesn't work, I'll build a seawall, or whatever, you know, like, but the reality is like, you can't do it. You lose, right? In other words, we try to sort of build some kind of defense against impermanence. But it's funny, right? I'm going to build a levee to block out the ocean. First of all, you can't block the ocean. Second of all, this side of the levee is still impermanent. So you lose. You know what I mean? Like, if you're fighting impermanence, you always lose. And part of what Lama Tsongkhapa is getting at here, I think implicitly, when he talks about non-attachment to this life, right, and just practicing Dharma, is an implication there, which is like, in one way, if we let go of that whole concept of permanence, and we say, well, all that's left is in this moment to practice Dharma, right? In this moment to practice, like, altruism. In this moment to practice compassion. In this moment to practice generosity. Like, we've already achieved so much freedom and so much peace of mind because we're in line with reality. I mean, you give up, when he says non-attachment to this life, in one way, that's like you've stopped fighting against the reality of your existential situation. Does that make sense? Like, kind of, when you've achieved that, and Lama Tsongkhapa says, so that's what he's getting at. Lama Tsongkhapa says, already you have so much peace, actually. You know, and he says that nobody else, like he says, nobody else knows that peace, actually. Like, there's somebody else would look at the person, and they would have no idea how much peace that person has in their heart, right? And all that's required is that person realized impermanence, and they're actually living according to it. And the rest of us, right, we're like running around like insane people, right? Like trying to sort of keep something up. You know, like sometimes people talk about that, like, oh, people say I'm juggling too many balls or something like that. But actually, as long as we haven't realized impermanence and given up on this life, and giving up on this life, you get what I'm saying here, it doesn't mean like, the teachers say this, you could like, it actually happens, you know, I've known people, like, so in other words, you could go off to a hut or a cave somewhere, right? And say, I'm just going to meditate and not have given up on this life. And so then what are you thinking? Right? In other words, then you're still doing the same thing, right? If somebody's sitting there in a cave and they're thinking, wow, like if I stay here for like this long, and then when I go out, people say, oh, that person did a 3-year retreat, that would be really impressive. And then I'll be well known and people think I'm somebody very special, right? Well, that's still, actually that person, if we're meditating like that, we're not meditating on the Dharma, and we're sort of still, what's the word, holding on to permanence, right? We assume that we're going to live in, first of all, we assume we're going to live and make it out of retreat. And then we assume that somebody's going to think something of us. And it's still a game, right? It's still the same thing as if you were, whatever, you know, just trying to be the richest person on the block or something. Now I'm the most spiritual person on the block. None of that is this, right? This is saying, you just like, it doesn't matter. Like, all that matters is what I do this moment, and if I practice Dharma this moment, right? And what he's saying is, if you just do that, right? If you give up all that stress of trying to like sustain something that's unsustainable, then naturally you'll be happy. And naturally you'll practice Dharma, right? Which means all these things, right? Like meditating on impermanence, meditating on love, meditating on compassion. When you interact with others, you'll be contemplating it from that point of view. And then naturally you'll progress spiritually. It'll just happen, right? Then you don't have to say, I'm going to make it. Like, actually, if we're egotistical and permanent, then if we think, it's kind of funny also. The other way we sort of think, oh, I'll make myself stable this way, and I'll be. And then if we're relating to spirituality through that, then we sort of think, I'm going to make myself enlightened, and I'll force it. I'll do it. What this is saying is that's also some idea of like, as if there's a permanent I who can make some permanent enlightenment happen. And what he's saying is, it's impermanent. Right? So relax, like let go of your attachments, and just in each moment, focus on the path. Right? And naturally the results will come, because that's the nature of things, is they're impermanent and they depend on causes and conditions. And then one of the things, then Lama Tsongkhapa says here, when someone asked Kamawa about moving on to another object of meditation, he said, repeat the previous one. When asked about the remaining ones, he said, there's nothing beyond it. And then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say, so if you understand the points up to this point, how to rely on a spiritual teacher, this life of leisures and endowments, and then impermanence, he says, then if you meditate on those things well, all the scriptures and their commentaries you'll understand the intention, what the Buddha meant. And I think I was sort of contemplating this point. I think it's an interesting one, because it's not that, like, in other words, he hasn't yet taught the method for generating bodhicitta. That comes later, for example. He hasn't yet taught explicitly the method of meditating on emptiness. That comes later. So I thought, well, why does he say just by understanding these points, all the others will dawn for you? And I think it's pretty clear, right? What he's saying is, if you do these 3 points well, all the others will be easy, right? Like, in other words, if you know how to rely well on a spiritual teacher, you understand the nature of this precious human life, and you understand impermanence, then, like, so you say it, everything else, so you say it, all the obstacles will start falling away, right? And the rest of the points of the Lamrim will just, like, arise like that. And, they'll arise one after another. Whereas the problem with many of us for our spiritual practice is we don't spend long enough, and we don't do these points well enough, right? And then when we move on to those further points, we're not doing them purely because we're still grasping at this life, and then we don't make as much progress.
So impermanence is something that arises from contemplation on death, or is it? Because I'm not seeing where is impermanence, like when you contemplate death, or it arises as the final point of the third point. Is that?
It's actually important, right? Like, so they're, like, in Buddhist philosophy and practice, there are actually, like, 2 levels of impermanence they're talked about. One is gross impermanence, which is the main topic here, actually. Mostly in this Lamrim, most of what's being taught is gross impermanence. So gross impermanence means, gross impermanence, for example, would be death. Right? So that is a version of meditating on impermanence, right? In other words, this life is impermanent. Eventually I'm going to die. Or the impermanence of relationships, right? Like, in other words, in other words, a group of people come together, someday they part, and they never see each other again. So that's gross impermanence, right? Or gross impermanence is also like you build a house, then someday that house falls down. Right? And so you go look at the ruins of other old houses, and you say, oh wow, look at that, impermanence, things change. Right? So these contemplations mostly are contemplations on gross impermanence. So this is impermanence. But then there's a second topic in Buddhism, which is subtle impermanence. And so subtle impermanence is, sometimes Buddhist philosophers will say this phrase, things don't abide for a second instant, right? Which is true, actually. In other words, on the gross level, we say this person was born, they lived, and then they died. They were impermanent. On the level of subtle impermanence, you actually say each instant that person was changing. And if the person didn't have this nature of subtle impermanence, they wouldn't eventually get old and die. So subtle impermanence is clear, right? And the house, it wouldn't fall apart if it weren't changing every instant, right? The house is also aging and changing each instant, and then eventually it falls down, or. And so, I'll actually share something, just my own contemplation that I was thinking about, is so the first of the first three reasons, right? The certainty of death, right? There's no place you can go to hide, and life is continually decreasing, and it's not much time to practice Dharma because of all this, right? That's all gross impermanence, right? Then the second 3 points about the uncertainty of the time of death, right? So the one about that on this planet you don't know how, there's uncertain lifespan, that's gross impermanence, right? The second one about even the things you do to stay alive may cause you to die, that's still about death, so it's still gross impermanence. Then there's the third one, which says, I was just contemplating this myself, where it says, this life is impermanent like a water bubble. And I was just thinking, is that one teaching gross impermanence or subtle impermanence, actually? I never asked the Lama this question. I just thought, as I was teaching it, I thought, I want to ask Genshin Rinpoche or somebody this question. Because I thought, I actually think that, personally, when I meditate on that one, I think that one's teaching subtle impermanence. Whereas, because if you look at what's the nature of a water bubble, right, it's something that is so insubstantial and so impermanent, you feel it doesn't last for a second instant. It sort of changes. Each instant is changing and then it disappears. And so, I think for me anyway, when I contemplate that third point, I'm not sure. In other words, I'm not sure what the Lama would say. I want to ask that question, but it's an interesting question. I'm not sure if that one's teaching gross impermanence or subtle impermanence. That particular contemplation. And then these last three are again gross impermanence. Right? When you die, this doesn't matter. When you die, your money, wealth doesn't matter. When you die, your body. Those are all gross impermanence. So all these points are teaching impermanence. Most of them are clearly teaching gross impermanence. That one point might be teaching subtle impermanence. I don't know what people think, but if you really start to contemplate that your body is like a water bubble, right? That insubstantial. To me, it feels like you're starting to approach subtle impermanence, right? You're starting to recognize, wow, it really is changing. It doesn't stay the same for even an instant, which is true, right? Whereas when you contemplate that point, so all these points are teaching impermanence, but some are teaching gross, and that one might be teaching. I think the one way of meditating on that one would be to meditate on subtle impermanence.
Right.
But does that answer?
But I guess no. But I guess what I was saying was that once you meditated on all the points of death and impermanence, and then you come to the conclusions, right? Like the three conclusions. Well, it seems like the final, like the realization per se, is like, I could die now, so therefore I have to practice now.
Mm-hmm.
But so where is the impermanence? I guess I don't see the impermanence. There is no realization of impermanence, or is that combined in there?
Yeah. So if you've realized this point, then you've realized at least gross impermanence for sure. You've realized it. Yeah.
Because you've started with a base of permanence.
Yeah.
Right? The base idea is permanence. So once you realize this, then it leads to impermanence.
Yeah, actually, once you realize the second point, really, once you realize I may die at any instant, actually at that point you've realized, in other words, because what Jeff was saying, like, think of it this way, like to answer your question, right, like, in terms of realization, right, like, they talk, like, when Lama Tsongkhapa teaches on emptiness, he talks about there's an object of negation, right, so the object of negation there is grasping at self-existence, right, and then when you negate that, you realize selflessness, right? Here, what you're negating is the idea, which is what Jeff's saying. So you have a wrong concept of permanence, right? That you're holding on to. So you identify that's the delusion, right? And then if you realize even the first two, right? If you realize the certainty of death and the uncertainty of time of death, when you actually realize that, not just intellectually but sort of experientially, right? Then you've refuted your wrong concept of permanence. And you've realized impermanence because you've refuted a wrong view, right? And when you refute something and you actually realize that refutation, not just through the power of your own contemplation, right? Then you've gained a realization at that time. and you could say it like, there are different levels of realization too, I guess, but, well, there are, but at that point, you gain like a, what's it called? From a, you could say a valid inferential cognition is one way of, like, from a philosophical point of view. But that's a realization. So you would say, really, on a practical level, you could say when you've realized those points, you've realized at least gross impermanence. It's actually a realization because you've refuted your own wrong view, as Jeff said, of permanence of yourself. Is that sort of, yeah. So you have to actually refute your own, and it would be an experience, right? The person who sort of was having this grasping, and the way the person could tell, it's not just, whereas it's one thing to sort of read it and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's intellectual, that's correct. That's the wisdom of hearing, right? But when you've done enough contemplation so that you have this kind of visceral, what's the word, recognition, and your behavior changes, right? You start to, in other words, at that point, your attachment to this life decreases, your energy for Dharma increases, and that's the reflection of the realization. Yeah, any other, so yeah, this is the end of this whole section on impermanence and death. So any other questions about this?
Well, I don't know if it's a question. I once heard a lyric in a song, and it said, "Every new beginning is another beginning's end." And that's the way I tend to look at it. I couldn't be here if I held on to the past. And so the past is impermanent. I'm kind of happy it is. So whatever did once exist, all those problems I had, they don't exist anymore because I'm here. They're gone.
Which is part of the positive
impermanence
aspect.
is nice,
Yeah, that's part of the positive aspect of impermanence, right? Our problems are also impermanent.
Yeah.
Difficulties are impermanent, yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. That would be, Buddhist view would be totally consistent with that lyric. Yeah, other comments or questions before we leave off this section? Of course, we don't really leave off this section because it's not. Well, and actually, one other thing too is that, so what I'm thinking, I guess, since now I think we should just do that section as like a retreat day. We've been doing those retreat days when we finish the section. So maybe what we should do is the first one in January. What do people think if we sort of do this 9-point death meditation then, as like the 3-hour sort of practice? So that's why I was waiting to schedule. I wanted to see if we would get through this. So we did. So I'll plan like the second weekend, the second Saturday in January. The first Saturday is like right after New Year's, so can't do that. But the next one, whatever that'll be, the second Saturday, we'll schedule like a retreat day that day, or a 3-hour practice.
The 9th.
The 9th, is that the day? Okay. Yeah, no, and before we totally do off that section, do people get that idea too? I think it's quite interesting. Like, just I've heard so many people, like, I've heard people say that they, let's sort of say it, like, Lama Tsongkhapa, I think, makes it very, very clear, right, about why we're meditating on permanence and what the experience should be like. I just want to say this one last time, because you may hear other people, even, I think you guys will get it now, but you may hear other people say, oh, I don't want to meditate on permanence because it's depressing, or I don't want to meditate on permanence because that's like sad, or something. And so, from having studied Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation, you guys should now be able to say, if somebody says that, you should be able to say to them, oh, you've misunderstood how to meditate on permanence. Let me explain it to you, Or it's like, I don't think you guys will have that confusion anymore, because Lama Tsongkhapa makes it so clear. But you'll hear people, if you're around Buddhist people enough, and if like the Lama's teaching on this topic, you'll hear people say that. And now that you've studied Lama Tsongkhapa's approach, or his explanation of that, so if you hear somebody say that, help them. Or explain like, oh no, it's not depressing at all. It's like, this is what, it's the source of contentment. It's the source of happiness. It's the source of joy. It's the source of energy for your spiritual life. It's like, and it's a source of being in line with reality, right? In other words, as long as you're out of touch with reality, you suffer. Here you're like taking a huge leap towards being in line and in sync with the reality of your experience, right? So it's a source of joy, not a source of depression or something like that. So I just want to remind you that, because you'll hear people sometimes say that. So now you've understood what he's saying, so you can like help people if they have that misunderstanding.
Remember, the hippies just said, just let go, right?
We have a real hippie here to to remind us, which is great.
Impermanence is actually reality of life and of the universe. Now, the problem, the key point is how to practice. It looks like there's a balance between early life and and practicing that. If I live in a monastery of little cave, it's very easy. Just forget everything about life, and then the basic necessity of life and eat and a piece of roof and shelter. But then when you live in the world, then there's a point of practicing detachment while functioning, normally in the world and getting things going. There's a balance. When you live in the world, you can't go to the extreme.
You can what?
You cannot go to the extreme. If I live in a monastery, then I practice Lama every day and meditation all the time and so forth. I go to retreat in 3 months, 6 months, but then when one live in the world, and just one week of retreat is difficult.
I'll say a couple comments. Like, first of all, I know what you mean. Yes, it's true. And at the same time, I guess I'll say is that I think what's supposed to work is that if we really contemplate these points, there is, like, I guess I'll say this way, like, if in other words, if every day more and more one contemplates just the truth, right, as you said, it's the truth, right, impermanence is the truth. So if we contemplate that more and more, part of the idea, I think, is that, even if one is still doing a certain behavior, like let's say a person went to their office and worked, right? And then they meditate seriously on impermanence, and then they go to their office and work. The idea is that the mind should be different. There is, even if you're still doing you're still doing your job, or whatever that is, right? The idea is that your mind should be different, really, is the idea here. And there's many points in the mind training, Lojong, the mind training tradition, where they really talk about that. They say, in that tradition, they talk about, you don't have to change your external behavior, but if you meditate on these points well, the idea should be like that your attitude is different, and one example of that Kensho Rinpoche sometimes was talking. He would quote some advice, like of the Buddha gave to a king, where the king had a lot of jobs, like responsibilities, and he wasn't going to go be a monk, But he said things like, so throughout your day, you practice, even as you're doing your job. In his case, it was a king, right? That you're practicing bodhicitta, you're doing rejoicing, you're dedicating merit to all sentient beings. I think those were the 3 practices the Buddha taught to that king. And I was thinking, like, if somebody, even like if there was, if the king hasn't meditated on impermanence, right, then what'll happen? You could say for sure, right, that if the king didn't meditate on impermanence, he would say, wow, that was good advice the Buddha gave me, but I'm too busy, in my mind even, to practice those things. But if the king meditated on impermanence, right, then, like, he could still be the king, right, in his case, I think he was, but suddenly there's time, like, his mind can then can meditate on bodhicitta while he's doing his job, you know what I mean? So I think that's part of the difference, is by meditating on these points, even if the person still has a job, that's fine, right? But I think it creates the space in their mind, because they're not, if you're a person who has the idea of permanence, when they're at their job, it's like what I was saying earlier, they're trying to control it, they're trying to make it, like they feel, also they have some idea that this is real and permanent, and it's going to, whereas the person who's meditating on impermanence is more relaxed, actually, right? And they have some mental space, so that they can meditate on bodhicitta while they're working, for example. So I think that's the difference in a way.
You mean the difference of attitude?
Yeah, attitude.
Now, right, we have reached the attitude towards the duty.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's the idea. Again, if somebody can go off and just meditate or be monastery, great. But even in daily life, I think it changes the attitude. And there are many people actually. If you think about both in India, in ancient India, and in Tibet, for example, other Buddhist cultures too, there are many stories of people who I mean, of course there are many people who were monks or yogis and went off to caves and they achieved enlightenment. But there are actually many stories of people who also worked, had a job and achieved enlightenment. Many of the 84 Mahasiddhas in India were people who had jobs, actually, and they became enlightened. But it was because their mental attitude was more and more Dharma, and they never quit their jobs. Even when they were Mahasiddhas, sometimes they kept, what was it? Talopa, well, he quit his job later, but he was crushing sesame seeds, right? There were all different stories of different people, and that's even true in Tibet. If you look at Marpa, right? He had a household and a farm and all that. So there are many examples of that. So I think the main thing is our attitude. Yeah, any other comments before we go on? Okay. So the next main, so we finished, let's see, that being said, oh, is there one more point here? That being said. Okay, then there's a transitional point here where he says, Lama Tsongkhapa says, once you've realized, right, impermanence, he says, he basically says, then remember that at the time of death you don't become non-existent, but you must take rebirth. Right? And then he says, this is in line with what we were saying earlier about compounded phenomena depend on cause and conditions. Right? He says here, you are not under your own control, but under the control of another, which is your karma. And so where you'll be reborn and how you'll be reborn depends upon what you've done, on your actions, right? On your actions of mind mainly, but also of body and speech as well. This is an important point from a Buddhist perspective. So one is, of course, like the Buddha and Lama Tsongkhapa here is saying, at the time of death you don't become nothing, right? Something doesn't become nothing. And the idea is that you take another birth. Right? And a couple of things I wanted to point out here. One is, remember, all compounded phenomena are impermanent, right? That's the nature of the universe, as you said. A number of people have said, actually. And so one point, from a Buddhist perspective, is there is no permanent rebirth. There's no rebirth that you can take where you're going to stay there forever. And that's the difference I want to say, because we're about to get into the next section is the suffering in lower realms. But the thing too is, from a Buddhist perspective, even if you take rebirth in heaven, it's not permanent. You'll leave there. And even if you take rebirth in hell, it's not permanent. You'll leave there. Like, so there's nothing permanent. There is planets aren't permanent, stars aren't permanent, universes aren't permanent, hell isn't permanent, heaven isn't permanent, nothing's permanent. Ghosts aren't permanent. Whatever you take rebirth as, whatever kind of world you take rebirth in, that world is impermanent. That's a basic tenet of the Buddha's insight, actually. It's a basic insight the Buddha had, is there is nothing. There's no place you can go that's permanent, and there's no sentient being who's permanent. All beings by nature change instant by instant. The nature of mind is that it changes instant by instant. So any creature that has a mental continuum, by nature, is changing instant by instant. So there is no permanent. And then how things develop depends on causes and conditions. That's another very basic, the most basic Buddhist principle, right? Is all things dependent origination. Right? That's what we were saying. Interdependence or interdependent arising, dependent origination. Right? All things depend upon causes and conditions. And when the right causes and conditions come together, then there's an appearance of something, right? They give many analogies for this, right? If you plant the seed of a flower and it has water and soil and light, then without a choice, there's a flower there, right? If you're missing the seed of a flower, no matter how much light you shine, there's not going to be any flower. And so the other thing that Lama Tsongkhapa and the Buddha are saying here is that in terms of rebirth, sometimes you hear people will say, they chose a rebirth. From a Buddhist point of view, you don't choose. There is a Buddha and Lama Tsongkhapa here are saying, you don't get to say, right? Like, I'm going to be whatever. I'm going to be a movie star in my next life. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, I'm going to do that. Right? You don't get, or whatever, you don't pick that. Your karma, right? So it means your actions, what you've thought and done is what determines that. Does that make sense? And so that's, and there are different kinds of karma, which we'll get into in that kind of a little bit later in the text. But particularly there's something called, they sometimes call it throwing karma. It's a karma that throws you into a life, actually, is one way of saying it. Those are like, and one way of saying it, that's like a complete karma, right? So, like a karma of morality, right? If you've done a complete, let's say you took a vow not to kill, and you followed that vow, and you did it out of a wish to be nonviolent, it's because you didn't want to harm others. So you took that vow and you kept it, and you didn't kill anybody. Right? That's a karma that can throw you into a good human rebirth. Right? On the other hand, if you, out of hatred, did kill somebody, right? That's a heavy negative karma that will throw you into a bad rebirth. And that's part of what this text is getting at. And so, what they're saying next is, the next point of the Lamrim is to meditate on the sufferings of the lower realms. And before we get into that, actually how to contemplate that, I wanted to make a comment. Actually, a couple comments. One is I was thinking, I sometimes joke with Jeff about this, that I sometimes think, I'll go sort of say it, I sometimes think, people don't like this topic often. It's not usually a favorite topic of the Lamrim for Western people. But there was that story, sometimes Lama Tsongkhapa would teach on it, right, and people were just like, people would be streaming out of the room or something.
You taught one whole course.
For a whole month on that?
On the sufferings of the lower realm. Actually, the hell realms.
In the hell realms. So.
Just the hell realms.
And so, I actually want to say my own perspective for a minute on it, which is just share some thoughts which aren't in the text exactly. Which is actually like, how should we say it? Like, I just want to say this, like, I think that, it's funny, I think it's related to the wrong view of permanence, to talk about what we were talking about earlier, right? This idea of permanence. Actually, it's weird. I was thinking this the other day. I thought, like, do you think a deer ever thinks, oh, later I won't be a deer? Later I'll be a person in a future life. I don't think so, actually. Maybe some deer did, I don't know, but I don't think so usually. Or as these dogs think, wow, next time around I'll be an elephant. I don't think so. There's some idea of permanence, like we think whatever we're in is always going to be something like this. If you don't think about, first we have the idea just like we don't even want to think about change, right? Then if we recognize change, actually check for yourself, right? If you start to contemplate impermanence, right? Oh, I'm going to die. I think there's a subconscious sort of tendency to assume, well, I'll be somebody like this again. And I was just contemplating this, like, it's funny, we're always kind of, I was just reading something like this where somebody was pointing out, like, whereas when, he was pointing out, where did that I was mentioning that tsunami, where did that tsunami hit? Japan,
Yeah, Japan.
and there was another one before that. Anyway, Indonesia, and I was thinking, like, and he was just pointing out, like, if you don't, like, when somebody goes to the beach, as he's back one, nobody who goes to the beach thinks, oh, maybe there'll be a tsunami, maybe I'll get drowned in a tsunami when I go to the beach. Let me buy a ticket, I'll buy a flight. I'm gonna buy a flight ticket to go there. But occasionally that's what happens. Right? And then I was thinking of, what did you think about this, right? Like, we sort of don't assume that, or I was thinking of, in the in like the early 1900s in Vienna, I work as a psychologist. I was thinking about like the people who are hanging around this very intellectually stimulating time with Freud, right? Most of, and not all, but many of his students were Jewish. Right? None of them were thinking, wow, like in 30 years there will be a Holocaust, a genocide here, right? And even like, recent, I was talking about, recent, like, anyway, there are all kinds of stories like that, right? Whereas it doesn't occur to people, like, wow, like, next week, this, actually, I'll give one more example, okay? I was thinking of different examples. The other day I was thinking of this too. Have you ever gone for a walk in the battlefield? like over in Manassas. Right? It's like a very quiet, beautiful field, you know. And if you walk there, like you see on a weekend, like a day like today, for sure there'll be people there, like with their kids having a picnic, people walking their dogs, you know, sort of people, couples walking hand in hand and smiling at each other, right? And if you stop and you think, well, why is this place a park? Is because once on the same field, right? Neighbors, right? Americans, they're all Americans, right? Were killing each other there, right? And they were dying in agony, right? And as they were dying, they were still trying to kill the other person, right? And it's the same place, right? It's the same field, right? But depending on the people, right? Depending on your mind, right? That place can appear, and depending on the karma, and the causes and conditions, that place can appear quite wonderful, right? With people at their picnic, or it can appear like completely filled with blood, right? And like corpses and people filled with hatred and fear and terror and rage, right? That's true, isn't it? I mean, it's undeniable, right? The same thing if you go to like, there are some, I mean actually, what's a little weird if you think about it is most places on this earth are like that. That just happens to be like what's sort of set aside as a park because of that. But most places on this earth have actually, have had horrific things happen to them, and have also had wonderful things happen to them. And it depends upon what? Right? It depends upon the minds of the beings there, right? Actually, as I was thinking, I thought of you, Gabe. Sometimes you told me a little bit about your travels when you were in the army, right? And I mean, you've seen some of that, I think, in your own experience of it. So anyway, my point is like, okay, so I want to go back now, right? So the point here that we're getting at when we get into the lower realms, which I think is a fascinating point, actually. I actually think it's this for Westerners. This is my own reflection. For us, Westerners who aren't familiar with it or something, I think it's actually you have to understand Buddha nature to understand this in a way, right? In other words, your mind. The point of this, really, what Buddhism is saying is, your mind, right, which is its nature is clear. It's clear light. Actually, that's the ultimate nature of your mind. Just like that field. I'm using a metaphor now, right? That field is just an open field. Right? Your mind, like that, is clear. It's a metaphor, right? So between the field and your mind. And with your mind, you can create Buddhahood, you can create heaven, or you can create hell, actually. That's what Buddhism is saying, actually. And it's up to you, actually. It's up to what you do with your mind. Does that make sense? Like, and it's true, actually. Like, if you want, take a house, right? If you buy a house, right? Then depending on your actions and what you do with that house can be a wonderful place, or you can turn it into hell, for sure. It's definitely possible. You know, like, whereas, buy a house. If you buy a house and you cultivate hatred in that house, and you abuse a child and spousal abuse and all that, then eventually that house will feel like horrific, right? On the other hand, if you buy a house and you practice love in it, that house will feel wonderful. Right? Same as the field. So your mind is the same thing, is the point. Does that make sense? Like, what you do with your mental habits, you can create all kinds of appearances. And so I'll just share now. I think, for me anyway, that like contemplating these points about the lower realms, I find it fascinating, actually, in the sense of, I sometimes think, you'll see as we go through it a bit, like, on the one hand, like, I don't know if anybody's read Dante's Inferno, which is a Christian version of heaven. And actually, if you think of both, he describes heaven and hell. His descriptions of hell are better than his descriptions of heaven. That's interesting. Which maybe shows something about our culture, I'm not sure. But actually, if you study Buddhism describes the most sublime, beautiful experiences, right? If you read the descriptions of Amitabha's Pure Land, it's like, wow, it's hard, it's almost unimaginable, the descriptions, right? And then if you read the Buddha's descriptions of hell, they're more frightening than Dante, actually. Buddha was a better describer of hell than Dante. And to me, it's a description in part of like, it's a reminder of what we can do with our mind. Does that make sense? So you have a choice then. And this is so we're going to start with later will come descriptions of the most sublime states of mind in the text. Here's a description of the worst things you can do with your consciousness. Does that make sense? If you choose to go a negative way, then these are the worst ways what's the word? The worst. It's descriptions of the worst appearance. I'll say one more reflection I'll share is I think it's fair to say this too, that I mean, in one way the Buddha describes a lot. There are 8. We'll go through them. There are 8 hot hells, 8 cold hells. There are intermediate hells. There are temporary hells. There are a lot of different hells the Buddha describes. And I actually, this is my own. I think it's true actually. Is that so to say it? Like, I think the Buddha was just giving a shorthand. In a way, like, almost like, you know, if you described, like, if you said, I went to India, right? You can't describe everything you saw. So you might say, I went to Delhi, and I went to Varanasi, and I went to Bodh Gaya. You might describe, like, the what's the word? There's no time to describe every single, and also if you go there, it depends how long you stay. You don't get to see the whole place, right? I think it's like that. Like the Buddha's just describing the what's the word?
Main points.
The main points, or shorthand, or like there's like the main travel guide if you want to go to hell. These are the main visiting points. So there are probably a lot of other versions of hell. Actually, the Buddhist scriptures describe that. Even there, if you read like the sutras, there are descriptions of other kind of hells that aren't mentioned here. So these are the main points. And so. Okay, so we've talked about impermanence, right? So then now, and one more point that's a little disturbing, but I'll just say it, is when you meditate on this, actually, you know, like, there's a reason why this comes right after meditation on impermanence and death, right? Because sometimes if you read about hell, or hungry ghost realms, or animal realms, it could seem like something very distant. Right? And one thing that the lamas point out when they teach this is they say, the distance, that, you know, if you want to know how far away are you from this, they sometimes say 1 breath. If you do the wrong, you know, if you die with hatred in your, you know, bad karma, if you die mainly with bad karma on your consciousness and hatred in your heart, then breathing is the only thing that stops you. That's the only distance between. They're not like 1,000,000 miles away. Right? The same goes for pure light, right? Too. There was like. Anyway, we get the idea. But I think it's important. That's why, for me, I guess I'm just saying, part of the reason I was thinking of that, actually, maybe I'll say that. Like, I was actually, you know, I remember Fidel, who used to come to class. You guys remember? One day I was talking to him, and he was sharing with me about, you know, he grew up in Rwanda, you know, and he was sharing how, like, there were these people who they were friends. They knew each other their whole lives, right? They considered each other like wonderful neighbors. You know, when you go to the shop, like just like you do, right? You go to a shop, and you say, "Oh, hi," you know, I'd like a sandwich. You know, the person makes your sandwich and gives it to you. And, you know, you say, "Oh, have a good day," and like that. Those people, right? Like they had those kind of relationships where their whole lives, and they were small towns. You know, like it's a smaller. Right? And then there was some political shift, right? And different. And then like a couple weeks later, those same people were chopping each other's, like one group, right, had machetes and were chopping the other people up, you know, killing entire families, right? And then like a year later, those same people were sitting around a table again saying, "Oh, why did that happen?" The ones who were still alive, right? I mean, most of one side were dead, but the few who were still alive, then they were talking about it, like, what happened to us, you know? The point I'm getting at is just like, things can change like that, right? Like that's what this is saying, right? Like that was human realm, but it was about as hellish as human realms get, right? Genocide is not as hellish as human realms get, and these things happen like that, right? Like it's one way, and then it's another way, and then it goes back, right? It's strange, isn't it? Right? Like. Anyway, and so the hell realms are a bit like that. Does that make sense? I mean, in the sense that they're impermanent, but also they can arise just like that. Okay? And how did that arise? Rage, right? Like hatred happens, right? And like all emotions, it's impermanent. But while it's happening, people can do horrific things, right? And we know that. So anyway, returning to the text, we'll do a little more. So here, Lama Tsongkhapa says it's important to think about suffering, right? Which is actually part of the First Noble Truth, right? The Buddha taught the first Noble Truth is the truth of suffering. Right? So this is part of contemplating the truth of suffering. is contemplating the suffering of the lower realms. And he says, you should think about the suffering of the lower realms, considering what will become of me if I am reborn in the lower realms. And then he quotes Arya Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist master, who says he advises thinking about the suffering of the hot hells, the cold hells, the hungry ghost realms, and so on, and animals as well, and 3 lower realms regularly or daily. He says every day. And he says that will further motivate you to make great use of this precious human rebirth. Is what Nagarjuna points out. And then Lama Tsongkhapa, as he often does, goes into other benefits. Why, in other words, what he sort of is giving us reasons. Why should you contemplate this? And he says, first of all, if you contemplate the sufferings of the lower realms, you'll have a better understanding of what samsara is, right? Whereas of what the nature of samsaric existence is. And only by understanding samsara, this is the Four Noble Truths, right? It's there in the Buddha's original teaching on the Four Noble Truths, is that only by understanding the nature of suffering, you develop the wish to become liberated, to achieve moksha, or nirvana, or liberation. Right? So that's one benefit of contemplating suffering. Then he says another benefit of contemplating this is when you recognize that you yourself have causes to be reborn there. If you have any tendency towards arrogance or pride, this will decrease it, which makes sense. Then he says another benefit is that we all have, all of us unenlightened beings have habits of doing negative things. And then he says, by contemplating these sufferings, it will help you overcome your bad habits to do negative things. And I'll say I'll just share one experience that I remember when I very first was getting interested in Buddhism. I remember I was at university, and I was studying with Professor Jan Willis, who's a wonderful Buddhist teacher. I remember she was lecturing. I was sitting right next to her. We were at a round table, not a round, but it was like a big table. It was like what's it called? Seminar. Right? So it wasn't a big classroom. It was like a table, students. Right? I remember, I forget even what she was talking about at that moment. But I remember I was young. I was just like first getting interested in Buddhism, and she was lecturing on Buddhism, and I watched as a mosquito landed on her hand. And then I watched. It was very natural because she was speaking to a whole group, right? She was lecturing, and she very naturally picked up her watch and started gently nudging the mosquito, like she didn't. And I was like, I had never seen anybody else I'd known up to that point would have immediately killed the mosquito, and she was gently nudging it, like, and then it flew away, and she didn't think anything of it. And I was like, oh wow, that was natural for her. I was like, she didn't have any impulse to kill it. Her natural impulse was gentle. She was very gentle towards the mosquito. And I was like, oh, how does somebody get that way? I'd never seen any. I was new. I was like, everybody I've ever seen is naturally wants to kill insects. She's gentle towards insects. I was like, how does somebody get that way? And that's partly this, right? It's partly contemplating karma. And then you get also empathy for others. And even like, I'll say one more point on that point about this avoiding non-virtue, right? Is for yourself, this is stopping your own bad habits. Is, sometimes there will be a lot of pressure, actually, in society towards hate or towards violence. Right? And it's an interesting question, like, what stops somebody when you're under a lot of social pressure, or everybody else around you, let's say, is having an attitude of violence or hatred? What stops you? Right? And one thing I'll say is this: understanding how bad the mind can get, and what going there if you follow that direction, where it leads for them and for yourself. I mean, then it's like, let's sort of say it. Even if there's social pressure or societal pressure to go a certain way towards hatred or towards anger or towards rage, it's contemplating these things, I think, that make us go, oh, like, I'm not going to do that, Otherwise, it's very easy to give in, right? Like when if like all your friends are hating somebody, some group of people or some whatever. It could be a group of people, it could be a political figure, it could be a social figure, right? Otherwise, it can be hard not to go there, right? But if you contemplated how horrific hatred is, then if you catch yourself even starting to go there, you stop and say, oh, I don't want to create that reality. I don't want to make this field into a place of torture. Right? I want to make this field into a beautiful park. You know what I mean? You see what I'm getting at? But I think it's partly understanding how bad our minds can be, and that each moment of hatred is like that. Does that make sense? That's another benefit. And then he says, an important point here. He says, in proportion to your own experience, compassion will then arise for others. And so what he's saying is another benefit of understanding the lower realms and how horrific minds can get. If you, he says, first relate it to yourself. The first point is you relate all this suffering to yourself. But he's saying once you've done that, then when you see somebody else creating the causes for that, right, an overwhelming kind of experience of compassion will arise. Does that make sense? But he says it won't happen if you don't first relate this to yourself. But he says then you have the ability to have real compassion for the suffering of others. And I'll say one more comment just on this. It's like, how to, there are many Tibetan people, Tibetan lamas and other good practitioners, right, who, when their country was invaded, when they were tortured, when they were family members were killed, they were shot, all kinds of horrible things, right, who were able to say, oh, I had compassion in that moment for the perpetrator. Right? Even as it was happening, I kept compassion for that. The person who was torturing me, or killing my parents, and if you say, well, how could that be? How could you have compassion for that person? I think it's having contemplated this, right? Whereas from their point of view, that person they were seeing, wow, that person is in hell and is creating hell, right? That person is in the process of creating hell. And they felt, how horrible, right? They felt actual sadness and compassion for the other. But it was through contemplating these kinds of contemplations that they were able to do that. Does that make some sense? So they would look, I know some lamas like that, right? But they would look at the person and they would feel, in other words, they understood this point, right? And wow, that person also has a mind that's capable of peace, of love, of tranquility. But what's their mind filled with is hate, right? And then they're doing horrible actions, right? Torturing other people and killing other people. And we'll get into, so one is they're miserable now. The second is what's the result of that? It's horrific. Right? So they actually felt compassion. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa, that's the kind of thing Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, is it develops a deeper compassion. Sometimes if you don't contemplate these things, then our compassion is kind of very small. Usually it's for people who we really like, who are going through a hard time. But by contemplating these things, you develop a kind of, a different kind of compassion. A compassion that's much more strong than that. Okay, so that's a general introduction to why meditate on. And actually, he said, I'll just read one more line here. He says, these positive qualities of suffering, or of understanding suffering, really, comprise many important points of practice. And then he points out that Shantideva, in his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, points out that there's great benefit in contemplating the nature of suffering. And that's very clear, right? If you look at the Four Noble Truths, the very first contemplation is look at the truth of suffering. Right? Okay. So then, we'll just start on the, so he starts off with what he calls here the suffering. Contemplating, the first point in terms of contemplating suffering of the lower realms is he starts with the hell beings, which I had already mentioned. And then he starts with he calls the great hells, which are he starts off with basically 8 hot hells. Then there are going to be cold hells too. We'll start with the hot hells. I want to be clear, and he describes some kind of geography of where they are. I'm not going to get into that lesson, but actually he goes through 8, and you'll see he starts with what's called continual revival hell. And he says that's the first of these 8. And he says, and that's the most mild. Each one gets worse. So that the continual revival, which is a hell realm, is the most mild of these 8, and each of the suffering of the second, the third, the fourth, each one is worse. And we'll get into later also, each one lasts longer. The worst ones, the suffering is worse there, and also they go on for longer. Then we'll get into other things about then when somebody gets out of there, sometimes they'll go to the next, which is intermediate hell and so on. But okay, so I'll describe. Let's go through at least one or two just to get the start. So the one continual revival hell, right, is where actually it was consequently this one that made me think of that battlefield, you know, the Manassas battlefield and the people killing each other. What he says is that in this realm, in the continual revival hell, so it's a place, right, where people are there, beings are there, not people, I guess people, beings, right? And they have weapons that are, he says, that arise through the power of their karma, right? And basically they stab each other or beat each other, they fight with each other and kill each other. And finally, you know, they experience, you know, all the pain that one would experience by being stabbed and beaten and cut and all that. Until finally, there reaches a point where they faint, they collapse, right? They sort of fall unconscious, and they hit the ground. And basically, as soon as they've hit the ground, a voice comes from the sky or from kind of that place, and the voice says, "Come back to life." And they get back up and they start again fighting and stabbing as they were before. And that just goes on and on. So like, they fight and they kill each other, and then they're dead, and they get back up and they fight more and they kill each other, and they just keep doing that over and over again.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do these relate to like our lives here? I'm not saying I do that every day, but some people live that way. I mean, life is that's their view of struggling with other people to get ahead or whatever. Do these hells relate to the way people live here, or is it something we're headed for when we die, just another reincarnation, or?
The best view would be, I mean, these descriptions literally are of places one would go or after one's dead. You know, like
Okay.
experiences one would have after death. But you're right. In other words,
Well, there's hells here on Earth too. Then?
yeah.
Some people live that way now, and they're.
yeah. First of all, yes, there are hells on Earth, yeah. And secondly, like, what they would say is, by living that way here and now, you create the cause to. If you live that way in this life, when you finally have this wonderful human life, if you use it to do what you're describing, right? Like, if somebody uses it in that way, they're creating causes to, at the time of death. It's almost like, to give an analogy here, it's almost like this, like if you live that way, right? At least, just to say it, while you're still human, you can change, right? Like, if there's somebody like who's in that way of living, they still have a human life, right? So they could sort of realize, what am I doing? Or somebody could come along and they could happen to be ready to hear it and they could sort of shift, right? But, or circumstances can change such that they have some realization that that's not the way they want to spend their life. But if the person lives their life in that way, that would be an example of creating a cause, right? So then when that person dies, one thing that they say is whatever is most familiar to you and whatever karma is most heavy, or you've done the most of, in a sense, determines where your rebirth is. And so the idea would be, if you've lived that way and then you die with that kind of karma, then you could actually take rebirth in a place where this is that is just a realm like that. And in a way, one analogy would be, it's like an actually I looked up the length of time, or it says in here, it would be like a let's say it. So it'd be like a dream that goes on for millions of years, though, something like that, where the person just sort of, their consciousness is so familiar with that they're sort of in a realm where that's just all they experience for millions of years until the karma runs out.
On that point, so lifespan in the hell realms is said to be, what is it, 500,000 years compared to the Earth, to the human lifespan?
It's actually in the text. It comes out. Yeah, I did the math actually. If you want to know, like, it was disturbing. I actually, he doesn't do the math exactly. I mean, I sat down with a calculator last night and went through it. So the shortest hell realm, which is this one, continual revival. If one takes rebirth there, he actually said he gives this whole way of doing it. 50 years is one day in the God realm, and so many days of that realm is like a year in this realm. But if I did it in human, I related the lifespan of a being in the continual revival hell. In human years, it would be 1.71 times 10 to the 12th power. So it'd be like 12 zeros. after that. So 1.7. So there's not enough. There's not a word. Like I was trying to go. It's I don't know the word after trillion. Like it was like there's million, billion,
So
trillion.
it's in excess of 500,000. For some reason, I'd always heard 500,000.
400,000, that's pretty short.
We wish. I don't know. I mean, according to this, according to Lama Tsongkhapa in this text. I just did the math based on his
You
text.
can't even say the number.
But that's
I don't know
that's
the
the
number.
difference between the experiences of hell as a human, right? You have a lifespan of whatever it is, 120 years or whatever it is. That you will die from that experience. Whereas these, you will also die, but from our perspective, it's really forever. Which is true also of the heaven realms, the God realms, I believe.
Yeah, they're very long. And he goes through some of that about how long each of these different lifespans are in this text, actually. He says some of it. So it's very long lifespan, yeah.
Is there it's a silly question. Is there a karmic reason for the major differences in lifespan? Just how much suffering has to be endured?
I've read different things about that. Another thing they say here is it depends upon another way, at other points in this text, it actually says, here, I'll read this one too. Another way of saying it, though, Nagarjuna says, how long is the lifespan? He says, as long as the non-virtue has not been exhausted. So what he says is, when the non-virtue is, in other words, when the karma is finished, then that ends. So it depends upon the karma. So it depends how much, another way of saying it, I guess, it depends how much karma the person created.
Mm-hmm.
There's also that famous story of the Buddha, right? That story where, there's a famous story of the Buddha in a previous life, like long before he was a Buddha, at the very beginning of he was an ordinary person, right, before he became many lifetimes before. And there's a story that he was actually in hell in that life. And he had previously trained, he had done bad actions at that point, but he had also trained some in bodhicitta. He had gone to class and studied bodhicitta a bit, but he hadn't realized it yet. And he got reborn in hell because he had done bad things. And then the story goes that there was like a karmically manifested hell guardian who was beating the beings in that hell realm and were forcing him to push carts up hills while beating them. And it said that the Buddha was a hell being, and then in that moment, he looked at the other being who was being beaten and pushing the cart, and he said, I'll push it. And he kind of took the cart away and said, I'll push the cart up the hill and take the beating. Instead of you, he had compassion for that. He saw the compassion of the other hell being. And he said, I'll take the beating instead of you, and I'll push the cart instead of you. And he said that, it said that, the story goes that at that point, the hell guardian got so angry that he hit the Buddha, the previous incarnation of the Buddha, too hard, and the Buddha died. And because he died with the thought, he died while creating a positive karma, and being in love for this other being, then he died in hell and went to some positive. He took a good rebirth at that point. And then that was a turning point in his spiritual, that was actually a major turning point in the future Buddha's spiritual development. Because up to that point he had still had egotism. But it was in hell that he actually gave up his egotism and felt, I dedicate myself to others, such that I'm willing to take the burden upon myself. And said from that point on, his spiritual life took a better direction.
I have something to the opposite. I want to verify that with you. Did I read or somebody told me, Lama or somebody, when one dies, one is very angry at that point or have hatred, one go to hell. Is that true?
What they say is that it's very important. There's actually, what they actually talk about really, is that okay, so like at the time of death, let's say this. The question is what karma gets activated, right, at the time of death, and the idea is that if all things are equal, right, if your mind is just not in any particular emotion at that time, not a strong emotion, then whatever karma is most heavy and most familiar will ripen. But then they say if a very strong mental state is there, it causes a karma related to that mental state to ripen. So what they say is they talk about so if somebody dies with a feeling of hatred or anger or rage or something like that, that it'll cause a bad karma to ripen, and it'll cause the person to go to a bad rebirth. And the same way, they say the same thing. If a person dies, the opposite. If a person dies with a feeling of refuge in their mind, or with a feeling of love or compassion in their mind, then even if they had some bad karma, it won't ripen at that time because the mind is infused with a positive state. So it's true, actually. But okay, so imagine that. So that realm, again, it's beings, hitting each other with weapons and then being revived. And the ordinary lifespan in that realm is 1.71 with 12 zeros after. And the others, I won't go into the other numbers, but each number is longer after that.
Yeah, that was the short hill, right?
That was the shortest of the 8 of these. And actually, I'll read these too. Well, anyway, I mean, and you get the idea that one of the karmas for that realm is out of, with a mind of anger or hate, harming others. Right? For example, with a weapon or a stick or the karma for that is out of a negative state of mind. That'd be an example, right? It's not. They're not talking about out of love, if you whack a child or something out of love. They're talking about out of hatred or anger, hitting another person with a weapon or attacking other people, things like that. That's an example. There could be other karmas too, but that's an example of a karma. The next one is black line hell. And that one, it's called that because the hell guardians, they call them, or hell guardians, that's the term they use, draw lines on the beings' bodies with black ink, or black lines, and then they cut them to pieces along those lines. And again, that just happens over and over. You're the one being cut up, and it just happens over and over and over. And an example of the karma that creates the karma for that is the one example they gave was killing and chopping up animals, like killing animals and chopping them up while they're alive, for example. That kind of karma of killing. The next one, again, remember each of these is worse and lasts longer. So the next one is crushing hell. And that's where the beings are sort of gathered or sort of forced into an area, and then they're crushed by giant, they call them iron, here it says iron mountains, until rivers of blood shoot out of them, basically. That's the description.
Goat-faced iron mountains.
That's what it says. It says here in the commentary. I left that. Here it says goat face, but then in the commentary it said it could be. They could actually be shaped like other things. It's not always get shaped like a goat. And one of the karmas for that actually, is interesting. Because an example of a karma for that would be out of. This would say again, it has to be negative motivation, but motivated by a negative state of mind, crushing other beings, right? So for example, stomping, sometimes you see people happily stomping on insects.
So it's like the animals we kill, so it take the form of that.
Yeah, so it could be, so maybe, I don't know, somebody would like really stomping on insects, maybe it would take the form of a giant foot, I don't know. Just the crush.
Roach heads.
Roach head, yeah, so that could be roach heads, yeah.
Giant tick.
Yeah.
Does the commentary talk at all about the significance of these details? They kind of almost make it comical. They're not really comical, but what's the difference between drawing lines on the body and then cutting along those lines versus being cut? What's the...
I think
to me that's sort of nonsensical.
Oh, I see. If you meditate on it, one is the karmic cause. I think there are two things. One is they're trying to point out there's a different karmic cause. Like one is sort of attacking somebody, and the other is sort of that. Like they give an example of a butcher, who's or like somebody who's killing. We'll get to other ones later, like boiling beings alive, which people do all the time. Right? Like Americans do that all the time, like lobsters. So one is the specific karmas. But I think the other, if you meditate on it, because Pabongkar Rinpoche and Lama Tsongkhapa, but Pabongkar Rinpoche makes it very clear in his Lam Rim that you go through and you meditate on this. You go through each one, imagining the subjective experience, and I think actually it feels different. Like if you think of being a, I'll give you an example. Like the continual revival hell, right, is horrific in a way, right? Like you're fighting and being killed and all that pain, and then you have to get back up, and it feels endless. But this one is actually. In the continual revival, there's some feeling of you're fighting back. Like you have some. This one's worse, actually. You can see it, right? Because you're sort of like. What's the way to say it? The feeling is also of utter powerlessness, actually, right? That they can sort of draw lines on you and chop you up. But I mean, it's actually if you meditate on it, it feels different in the
I
sense that it's
understand.
more
It's-
horrific.
It's just the actual details to me are kind of weird, that's all.
They are weird. I think that's part of the point. um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why else though, but yeah, I guess.
Basically, heavens are weird too. I mean, when you think about a place, you immediately, to us, it seems really weird.
I actually thought.
The consciousness probably, different from when you have the physical body and function just in the physical body.
Yeah. Actually, I'll share one reflection on what you said. I thought was very funny was it's actually some lecture I heard online, but of Professor Thurman, and it just made me laugh. He said, who in the world would come up with this idea of like one nose and two eyes and the ears on the side? He's like, what a weird it's like that's just a weird idea. Like who would come up with this idea? Like doesn't even make any sense. And he's like, and they have two legs and they're like walking. It's like just seems like a very strange. He said like, if we weren't in that form, then we would think it sounds really strange. That was a funny point. That human beings seem like a very odd. They have hair that keeps growing, like when they chop it off. It seems like very strange. If somebody, if you weren't in this realm, it would seem like a weird idea. I think I thought that was a good point. Anyway, okay, so we did the crushing hell, and then the next one, howling hell. In this one, sentient beings enter a house, an iron house, and as soon as they enter, the fire blazes up all around them and they burn. And that's one of the ones that said it's like the karma for that could be like cooking beings alive, right? Or burning. Also people do that, right? Like one is cooking beings alive, but the other, some of these ones about the hot. Also, sometimes you hear that, right, where somebody burns something, like people do that. Like abusive people burn other people and so on. So those are examples of the karmas. That those beings get reborn by the karma of doing that out of hatred or anger. They were born in hells like this. Then he says the great howling hell. Yeah, Jeff, this is an example of what you're saying, right? So the one, they're in an iron house. The next one is the great howling hell, where they're in a double layer iron. It's like, and again, it's just if you imagine it, the feeling is like, the one is hopeless, then the other is even more hopeless. The idea of escape, that's part of the idea. It's like, I think part of the idea for us, if we're going to meditate on this, is like. Because part of the idea is you actually imagine being in that place, right? And you imagine what would it feel like. And after the howling hell, where it feels horrific, then you imagine the double howling, you feel like it's just, the feeling would be of utter hopelessness, right? Like of pain and agony, but also of like, I just think if you meditate on it, it feels like that, right? Of like, that it's utter, it feels, that to that being in there would feel utterly hopeless to ever get out, or ever escape. That's just my own, I don't know, it doesn't say that. Meditate on
The second floor seems superfluous to me. The second layer.
I hope it is for you. I hope you never.
I'm
go
hoping.
There. I hope you never go there. Yeah, we still have coming. I'll keep going. Then there's now. Remember, these are getting worse and worse, right? The next one is called hot hell, and in that one. Actually, basically, in that one, you're like a living shish kebab. It's kind of the idea. It says you're impaled with an iron stake, and then you're cooked, right, until you burn, until you sort of, until like you're one with the fire. But you still have a body in a way, but your body's on fire, and you're sort of a shish kebab, in the sense that you're impaled as well. Right? And at the same time, you're pounded by, what does it say here? Fire blazes out of their mouths, their eye sockets, their nostrils, their ears, and all their pores. Then they are laid out on their backs or face down on blazing iron foundation and pounded and tormented with blazing iron hammers. You see what I was getting at earlier about Dante, right? Like these descriptions actually, I think also, actually I'll say one more thing, just my own reflection, is actually it has to be specific though if you're going to imagine it. That's like, if they just said it's really hot, you get burned, like, you can't really imagine that. I think part of it is that you have to have specifics if you're going to really put yourself there. And again, I'll say this too, like, because part of the idea is you stop, right? If you think, so my mind's nature is clear light, right? Like, I could create any reality can be created with this mind, right? Like, especially with the precious human rebirth, which you've already covered. And then you meditate and you think, this is the reality I could create, right? I can do this reality if I try. And then you step back again, you come back to your own human life, right? And you say, wow, like, because I think that's what I think is interesting about this, right? Is you keep going back and forth. I was going to say, I think that's what's interesting about these realms and this contemplation, is that you come back, right? You're human, and you keep saying, like you keep recognizing the truth, which is, I have this precious human rebirth. I can create, I can do anything. In other words, I can create any kind of reality with my mind. You know, whether I'm on a field, or I'm in a house, or I'm in a workplace, or with friends, whatever. Like, it's really true, right? Like, I can create a reality of kindness and respect and dignity, or I can create a reality of hatred, you know, and torment. And these, like, you know, and then like you look at an insect, right? And you realize, like, with this insect, in relation to this insect, I can create a reality of respect, or I can create a reality of torment, or I can torture that creature, right? And then the same with other human beings, you know. And I think that's the point, you know. And like you look at a place, right? And you say, like, there can be peace there, or there can be war there. You look at a house, and you can say there can be love there, or there can be cruelty there, right? And then you look at your mind, and you say, my mind can have, I can create a mind that has peace and tranquility and love and compassion, or I really can create a mind like this, you know, as you were saying, right? Like, people do, you know, people do create minds like this, right? And actually, this hot hell, right, where the beings are, I just want to say a comment on it, right? Like, with the skewer going through them and the beatings and all that. Like, actually, if you talk to somebody who's, we all have the capacity. Anybody who's not enlightened has the capacity for sadism, right, to be sadistic. It's really, I mean, again, it doesn't. Lama Tsongkhapa is not saying I am, but what's it describing, right? It's describing sadism, right? It's describing cruelty, torture, you know, whatever word you want to use, right? And you know, and that's what's being described there, right? Which is different than these other ones, right? Like, there's one where two beings are fighting and cutting each other, is anger or rage, right? This one's, and actually, if you think about it, sadistic behavior is worse than, I mean, rage is horrible, right? But sadistic behavior, where you're sort of enjoying torturing and causing pain and sort of getting pleasure out of somebody else's pain, this is describing that kind of realm. I mean, that's what, you know, pounding with a hammer, I mean, you know, they're all different versions of sadistic behavior, but that's one. Yeah.
So Lauren, you were saying, like, so you meditate on a certain hell or hells, or, but then you come back and how do you say that again?
Yeah, so the idea would be, like, let's say you're going through these, right? So you would meditate on them, right? But then so you meditate on these different hells, right? But so you're imagining what it's like there. You're actually empathizing, right? It's empathy. When you empathize with another person, you put yourself in their shoes. Here you don't have shoes, but you're putting yourself in their realm, right? Then you come back and you say, okay, tomorrow I could be there, right? But today I'm still Gabe, human being, you know. And then you feel like, first of all, like, you recognize, like, so actually you make a resolution in a way, right? You say, wow, no matter what happens, I won't hate. You know, I don't care what anybody does to me. You know, like, whereas that's part of what goes on here, right? Karma, right? You're thinking about karma. So you would say, no matter what, if you meditate on this, I'm just saying, part of the conclusion you draw, right? You come back and you say, I can do anything I want with my mind. I can cultivate love, I can cultivate compassion. This is hatred, this is anger, this is cruelty, this is, and then you would sort of resolve, I don't care no matter what anybody does to me. If they kill me, if they kill my children, if they rob from me, I won't do that. I won't let my mind be that. Like, other people let their minds be that. I resolve, no matter what happens, I won't let my mind be like that. That's my responsibility. You know, like, what other people do to me is their responsibility, and it's my past karma's responsibility. But I don't have control over that. But I do have control over what I do now. You know, and so if you meditate on these, you would say, I don't care what happens, I won't be cruel to anybody. Like, and I don't care what they do, what the prompting is, like, I refuse to have hatred, I refuse to have rage. Like, and I don't care, like, how, in other words, my resolution is so strong, like that, you know, like, no matter what happens. I'll be unshakable in that because I know what the mind is capable of, right? If the mind is capable of this kind of thing, of this kind of horror, I won't contribute to that. I won't let my mind do that. You know what I mean? That's part of what, and then you would say, instead I'm going to cultivate the opposite, right? I'm going to cultivate love, patience, forgiveness, kindness, you know, and like it gets a stronger, the idea is because you recognize I'm human, I can do whatever I want. If I'm there, you also, you know, if I was there, I can't even do that, right? Or is it, once I'm fully in that other way of being, it's actually true in a way. You know, if you're in that realm, it's true. But also you know that, right? If somebody really gives in to hate, right? Once they're in hate, it's really hard to get out of it, actually, right? Like once you really hate somebody, then even if you say, I want to be patient, it actually takes sometimes years, right, to get back to being patient, if you're still human. You know? But, and if you're not human, then you can't even do it, is what they say. So what they say is then it's like, because I am human, I'm going to make such a resolve, and like even when and that any situation where I start to get into this pattern of something like that, karma like that, right, that I recognize I don't have to do that. I'm human, I'm not going to do that. So it's like that, does that make sense? And I'm going to watch my mind even more carefully, and not create any karmic tendencies of using like that. You know, like, yeah, I'll just give one out. Like, the other day when I was contemplating, I was thinking about, like, these fields around here, right? And then I thought of, you know, there's, one time I went to the Jade Buddha. It was like the Jade Buddha was in a field nearby, not Manassas, what's the next town over? Right, anyway, over there. And it was in that field, right? And there's a giant Buddha made of jade, right? And then all around were, like, Amitabha, but they have their own statues there, like Amitabha and Kuan Yin. And then it was, like, filled with people praying, right? And meditating on love, and, like, they were having classes for the children, the kids, and I was sitting in that field, and I was thinking about that field, right? I thought, like, now there's a field, right? And in like a open area, right? Somebody could be like one group of people could be having a war, right? One time. Then people could be like there, right? And they're cultivating faith and love, right? Then somebody else like could be in a field and they could be like, what's the word? Training to kill other people. Right? And I was like, wow. But the field is just a grassy area, but they do whatever they want. And so, like, I'm using a metaphor, right? Like, so you feel my mind is like that. It's like an open field like that, right? And so you think, like, I won't do anything even remote. Like, in other words, I want my field to be like the Jade Buddha time, you know? Like, whereas if I have a choice, which I do because I'm human, I want to make mine, you know, again, maybe you don't believe, but I was using that as an analogy, right? I was like, if I have an open field, I want it to be like the Jade Buddha, not like the war, and not like a terrorism training camp, not like a... like that.
So where does the part about like fear of the lower realm, like where does that come in?
So that would be this. It would be like, in other words, it would be scared. Like, whereas the idea is not just to fear. It's not enough to say I'm scared of going there. The idea is I'm scared of ever doing even one moment of karma that would go there. You know what I mean? Like, if I just say, oh, I'm scared of going to be a shish kebab or something, like, I mean, that's good. I don't want to be that. But that doesn't really help. I think you have to then say. So even one moment then of, like, where I'm mad at somebody and then I think, oh, I'm going to give them even a harder time this moment. Now I got them. Like, oh, like you just feel, it's that. Then I'm being that. I'm being just like that if I do that. For one instant, then that instant I'm being like that. So that's the fear, actually. It's like, I'm scared of even 1 minute of being like that because that's horrific, actually. Like, and oftentimes we don't recognize it's horrific when we're doing it. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, I mean, the fear starts with, I don't want to be in a crushing hell, right? But then the idea is, like, if you see some powerless creature, right, like, I remember that, like, you know, people who, like, you know, what sort of, they see a snake or they see a spider and they, like, stomp it, right? Because they feel I'm powerful and I can do that, right? And then, like, the idea here is that you realize, like, if I'm powerful over something else, if I have more power than something else, like, you know what I mean? That's the fear. The fear is, like, I'd be terrified to do that. Because that's horrific to do. You know what I mean? Like, ordinarily we don't feel it's horrific. We feel, well, so what? You know what I mean? Like, you know, like if you, I mean, where, you know, I remember when I was a kid, right? You see people, oh yeah, I stomped on it or something like, and then you think, oh, that's, you know, that's fun, right? Is the idea, like, but then if you understand this, right? The idea is you would be afraid to do that. Actually, does that make sense? So that's really the fear. If you just say I'm scared of the lower realms in and of themselves, I mean that's true. But that doesn't really, I don't think that does that much. The idea is that you have to be afraid of even the smallest harming somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, where you have the ability to harm somebody, or they provoked you, or just there's something's just like a passive creature, right? But the feeling would be, I'm afraid to harm anybody, actually, then, because I don't want to create that kind of reality for others or for myself. That's really, I think that's the most important version of fear. You know what I mean? Is the fear of creating any cause like that. Does that make sense? Like, that's the real fear. I mean, so when you meditate on these realms, they're scary, of course. Like, but the idea is to think, to create even the tiniest cause of that. That's really the goal. I think of these meditations is to feel even one instant of hate or a rage or something. It's like terrifying. Actually. You know what I mean, that's to be actually afraid of that. Because sometimes we got to stop, but I'll just say one last thing. When we feel independent, sometimes we have this idea, I'm permanent and independent, right? Like I'm not dependently arisen, is the feeling, you know. Then we can feel, well, I can have rage, but I'm just me. Doesn't matter. Like I'm not going to create some negative thing. I'm me. I can create what I want. So what? I had rage then, you know. But what this is saying is, no, you're dependently arisen, right? So one moment of rage means you created a habit or karma, right, an action that leads to this kind of reality. You know what I mean? So then it's like, oh, I don't have any special power, like to. Whereas if I cultivate one moment of that, then someday it's going to come back, and I'll do that again. And someday, if I die with that, like that will be my reality. So it's like you become afraid of doing even a moment of rage, or even a moment of hate, or even a moment of cruelty, or something. So that's the idea of the fear, really, is that, you know, it's like, yeah, you get the idea.
And is that kind of the thought behind sort of like any negative action?
Yeah.
Right? And then it becomes like the thought, like any like act that arises out of ignorance, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So you become more and more. So the idea is that you actually become, like, you know, it's not like, I want to say too, it's not supposed to be fear, like, I mean, how do I say it right? Yeah, I think you're right. There was this like, what's what I say it, like, ordinarily we're, like, when we're egocentric, right? When we're egocentric and sort of feel self-centered, then we're afraid of somebody else being mean to us or not helping us, or. But when you look at it from a karmic point of view, what we actually become afraid of is doing bad things, just like you said. It's like we become afraid of having a bad mind. Actually, really, we're afraid of letting our own mind be untamed and going in bad ways. That's what's scary. Actually. You know, from a karmic, when you understand karma.
I think this is an example of what you said. A few months ago, you were here, they say syrup was selling slowly.
What's that?
Cassis syrup is that the
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The selling story is that when some lamas were tortured by the communists in Tibet, and at that point, what they are afraid is losing their compassion, losing their loving kindness.
Yeah.
That's probably exactly what you're talking about. They are afraid of having moments of rage or hatred and what them
Yeah,
force.
that's exactly what we're talking about.
Now
Yeah.
I understand what.
Yeah, they weren't afraid of the other person, and that's the
Right,
difference.
right.
Yeah, exactly. That's the like. So in other words, what's the word? Somebody who doesn't understand these interdependence, right, is mostly afraid of external bad circumstances. Right? But if you understand from the Dara, at least from a Dara point of view, let's say, right, actually that's the real fear is of negative states of your own. Letting yourself be a negative person. Okay, we went over some. So we'll do the dedication. So those two verses. The supreme jewel, bodhicitta, where it is not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara.